Thank you for staying tuned to Newsmaker Live with Laura, where we make your stories our stories. Last week, Wednesday, we observed the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. And that is a day set aside by the UN to recognize that the fact that although 20 years ago a day was set aside for that, women are still being marginalized and abused in one way or another. And so every year we're invited to paint our world orange. Well, we started doing that through an initiative by Raise Your Voice. And last week I promised that I would, for the next 16 days, in my own way, do something that would paint my world orange. And I invited you as well to do the same. This week, my guests are directly involved. They have made their lives rather, all about protecting our women and children and people in general, human beings, protecting them one way or another from abuse, physical, mentally, sexual, whatever. That is their vocation. I'd like to introduce to you my guests this evening, Miss Suyen Daythorn and Miss Zyla. Yes. I like to call her the artist. You know how Prince a few years ago had this, the artist formerly known as Prince? I kind of like that. She is so, her ability is so vast, and the things that she does is so vast that she's the artist. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourselves and your organization? I know it's ProSafe. Tell us what does ProSafe stand for, and what do you do? What's your vocation?
Well, ProSafe stands for Positive Reactions Over Secrets and Fears. It was, I want to say, unofficially started in early 2010. Officially, I'll say the end of 2011. We knew that we wanted to do something in St. Lucia to address violence against women, and that was where we started at the time, women and children. And so that was what we were passionate about returning to do. We didn't have a direction at the time. We just knew that was what we wanted to do. We were able to narrow it down and figure out exactly where we were headed in 2011. And that's when ProSafe was officially born.
So I take it that you guys were out of St. Lucia, you didn't live here at the time? How did you guys meet, and how did you guys, you went to school together, or how did that relationship come about?
We went to school together, we lived in the same neighborhood, we knew some of the same people. And then we kind of lost touch because I'm a little bit older than Vel. So I went to school, and I walked in and randomly found Vel sitting on my couch, sitting with my sister and another friend of ours. I didn't know she was in New York at the time. I went to study, and so did Vel. We didn't know we were both in the same place at the same time, doing literally the same thing, until I walked in and found her sitting there.
And what is that same thing that, before, I'm assuming that before ProSafe came about, but what was that something that you guys were doing? In terms of your studies?
We were both studying psychology. Okay. Mine was specific to forensic psychology, and Vel was doing general.
Forensic psychology. Tell us a little bit more about that. What does that entail? I like to get a background. I think, it would lend to why you're doing what you're doing.
No problem.
And how come, you came to doing this.
Forensic psychology deals with the criminal aspect of it. It looks at, I shouldn't say just the criminal, it does look at the victim as well. It looks at the sphere of what happens when a crime is committed. It looks at all aspects of it, basically. When I initially went to school, I wasn't sure. At that point in time, I think I wanted to work with perpetrators. And so the idea was to get as much information about them. Still within the field of sexual assault, but from the perpetrator's side. Okay,
so your studies, when you went to study, specifically towards that field.
Correct.
Crimes, sexual crimes.
Well, it was general, it was forensic psychology. I did a lot of courses that were geared towards sexual violence. And getting more knowledge in that, but the course was forensic psychology, so it looked at everything. In crimes in general. So murder, burglary, stalking, you name it.
and you found your niche in sexual assault. Why that area?
Well, primarily because I'm a survivor, and so for me, I wanted to, I think at that time, understand more. So I honestly think when I went to school to understand what I'd been through, to understand what makes somebody do that kind of thing, and that's why I went down that path specifically. And then after going through, I found that I wanted to do more in terms of helping survivors, knowing that in St. Lucia we don't have many avenues for help for them.
Okay. Now I want to go into a little bit about your experience without going into too much detail, but I want to delve a little bit into that because I want our viewers to understand that those kinds of crimes of sexual nature,
Excuse me.
it can happen to anybody and in the least expected ways. But before we do that, I want to turn my attention to you, Xylor, the artist, and how did you get into your area, and what does your area specifically entail? When you went out to study, did you know what you were going into, or did you just have an idea?
I've always been passionate about taking back the family unit, is how I always describe it. I've always been interested in helping people who feel homeless, whether they be actual homeless people out on the streets, or people who are living in homes but feel homeless in that space, people who are orphaned, etc. And specifically, I've been interested in men's issues because I've always been against the idea of save the women and children as though the men don't exist.
Now that's refreshing because a lot of the times you find women who are advocates specifically look at men. They look at women. Now, I've been accused of that a lot of times because I speak a lot about issues of women. And that is deliberate. I am not saying that the men are not as important. I just think that we have a lot of years to catch up
on.
to our men. But it's refreshing where, you know, in your case, you think of the men as well, or even before.
Well, in addition, it's harmony. That's what my name is about. I'm a woman, and the XY actually comes from my middle name, which is Zenobia, which is Samoan for her father's pride. And so that's where the X and Y comes from. But then I really went with it because it has the X and Y chromosome. So I'm a woman carrying that as my message, which is that I cannot function without that balance.
Now, I deliberately earlier didn't ask you exactly what that meant, what your name meant, the Xylor, because I wanted it to be, I don't know, I try to be smart. I guess sometimes
So
we do that and I try to figure it out, but that's interesting.
It's the law of balance, which is the law of myself, the law of my being. For me to be who I am, a man and woman had to come together. Whether or not they stayed together, they came together. And here I am. And that is how all of us got here. And somewhere along the way, internal domestic violence and all other forms of domestic abuse and economic rape happen, and the family units get separated. I always say we go to our slavery long enough to judge the way our men wear their pants, but not long enough to see the long-term effects of ideas like what Willie Lynch did and how that is still living in our day. And we wonder where rape is coming from. We wonder when teachers don't feel empowered, when government workers don't feel empowered, when our ministers don't feel empowered to speak on behalf of us. Our people reflect our government reflects our people. And we see the way we're suffering here in St. Lucia and throughout the Caribbean and globally. It's not a problem just for African people. It's everywhere.
Right.
So that's what that is about.
So last week you were a speaker at the march, at that Raise Your Voice march, and you indicated there that you too are a sexual assault survivor. Is that where that is coming from, your desire to understand and to bring back or to reclaim the family unit?
I just realized that I grew up around a lot of pain. I grew up around a lot of pain and survival, and it took a lot out of my mom to be strong. She remarried. I saw what a wonderful man my dad was, but I still saw the limitations. I still saw just the survival happening, and I wanted to be able to transcend that for me if and when I was to have my own, or just for the people that I come into contact with on a professional basis. So I guess, like I said before, it's about, for me, it's about targeting the internal homelessness, suicide, the things that we are afraid to talk about. Where are the subtleties? Where does it happen? We can talk about the rapes that got reported recently, but those were rapes that happened external, outside the house, ambush. What about date rape? What about marital rape? What about incest? What about other family and other forms of subtle betrayal? What about sexual harassment? What about security guards? What about lawyers? What about doctors?
Right.
We have perpetrators everywhere. You know, this is very vast. Sue and I represent two kinds of survivors, just two out of many. And even between us, while we have some very strong similarities as far as the incest is there as well, and harassment is there, and for me, there's the date rape situation as well. There's those kinds of things, but still, Sue and I, between us, we have that respect to know that she does not know how I feel, and I do not know how she feels in specific context. There will be things that are the same, up to the point of, I don't know what you're going through right now, let me know what you need. That kind of language. And big part of our work is to teach people how to deal with survivors in real time when wounds are fresh, and also throughout the healing process.
So a little later on in the show, I want to touch on a couple of things that you said, and one of them is marital rape. I mean, every time I talk about this, people talk, you know, men in particular will call and say, oh, no. A husband cannot rape his wife. So I want to delve a little bit into that with respect to that. And I also want to talk about the language that we use. Us, when I say we, those of us who are not, have never gone through that, we've never lived that. And it's almost innate to want to make it better, but we don't understand because we've never walked a nanosecond in that shoe.
Right.
And so we say, sometimes we think we're saying the right things.
Yes.
We're trying to empower you,
Yes.
but we sometimes make it worse.
Yes.
So I want to talk a little bit about that and the language that we use, and what we can say and not say, and how maybe silence sometimes, and just the presence could be enough. But back to you, Sue. How did you just tell us a little bit about your background and what you went through and how that led you up to ProSafe?
Okay, excuse me, I was abused by my older half brother. I want to say for about 7 years. I can't give you an exact time frame though. I didn't tell anybody until I think in standard 4. I told.
What's grade 6 now? A lot of us will not break the correlation. I have to try to remember. Yeah.
Boy.
So we're dating ourselves a little bit, but standard 4.
I meant to say grade
is
6.
grade 6.
That's what I meant to say. I was thinking of everybody.
Yes.
So I told the teacher, and the teacher convinced me to tell the principal, and then somebody convinced me to tell my mom, because you know at that time we had Ave Maria and you had afternoon shifts.
Right.
So I was on the afternoon shift, so I had my mom alone in the morning, and I told her, and she told my dad. It unfolded, and I guess that's my story in as shortest piece of time as possible.
Were you believed at first, like when you first told the first person up to the last person that you told at that point? Were you believed every step of the way?
I think I was. I'm trying to remember. I don't think there was ever anybody who questioned it, but I don't think there was also any conversation. So it's difficult to say whether or not, because nothing was done. So it's, you told me this thing happened, but nothing after that. So I'm not sure if you then say yes, you were believed, or not. The teachers did nothing. I mean, I guess at that point in time, I don't know when mandatory reporting came in. I don't know how serious it is, whether it's like literally mandatory reporting or not. So, you know, there was no pattern to say, well, all right, I told one person. It was, You kept retelling your story over and over and over.
Okay, so it was not a continuation. Okay, I told my story here, and that person related that story, and then we're
Right.
taking it to stage 2,
Right,
and
right.
then stage 3.
No.
When you told your parents, when you told your teacher, and you told your parents, and got to your parents, and your mom told your dad, your brother, I assume at that time, was living with you?
Yes.
Was he removed from the home?
No.
Did the abuse continue thereafter?
No.
Did he threaten you at any point that you shouldn't have
Yes.
told anyone? And even with that threat, he was not removed from the home, nor were you
No.
removed from the
No.
home. How was that for you growing up?
I think
Did it become better at
I
that
think
point,
it
having
becomes-
spoken out?
yes and no, because I think that stopped it. But no, in the respect that nothing changed. So I think I wrote an article called "The New Normal," where you now know and everybody knows, but it's like everybody's acting like they don't know. So nothing's changed, but everything has changed, and so you just continue. So nobody else, like Vel, would come over and Vel wouldn't know. Everybody would be normal, quote unquote. So that's what happened.
How did you feel? I mean, for me, you've lived with this. I haven't.
Right,
I have nieces,
right.
and I hope someday to have daughters. So I need to understand, and I think a lot of our viewers need to understand, because we don't. And it's because we don't understand that most times we're silent.
Fair
and we
enough.
pretend it doesn't happen. Because
Fair
I don't
enough.
understand it. I cannot grasp it. I cannot put my finger on it.
What is it that you can't grasp?
How a child can say to her mother, I've been abused, this is my abuser, and have that child remain in the same home, in the same space, and just pretend it's not happening.
Not giving an excuse, but I think what happened in my case and what happens in probably a lot of cases is a couple of things. There's the I don't know what to do with this. This is my son, this is my daughter. What do I do? How do I even deal with this? The second thing is shame. If I do something about it, everybody's gonna know. And I think those two things keep people silent. Those two things allow nothing to happen.
Do you want to say something?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah, I want to say, yeah, the thing with this situation is, a big part of what we do with our work is to attempt to dissolve the shame, and we're coming from the victim standpoint. As advocates, we have a different tone, a different expression, different mannerism. I mean, you're asking Sue about her personal, and we can all feel it. We're all human, even if we don't know what she's experiencing inside. It's not a comfortable feeling, to say the least. Yeah. So what the problem has become is everyone keeps saying you're not supposed to be, all advocates everywhere are saying, oh, it's nothing to be ashamed of, it wasn't your fault. Everyone just throwing that around. But when it comes down to it, who's really acting like that? And so Sue and I grew up together as friends, and this happened to her and it happened to me. And
you guys
we
never
spoke,
knew?
We never knew. We were friends. I mean, we weren't bosom buddies, but we were friends. We had a neighbor sort of relationship. We went to the beach all the time together. We were friends. We were girls together. And we got separated. She went away to school, and I went away to school, like she said, and we found each other. And when we found each other, we hung out all the time. And we thought that, and we were always making these pacts to come back home and do something, Adlerian, which is basically giving back in psychology on a grassroots level, empowering our community. Still not having direction as to what. And it was only much later in reading one of her essays for school that I realized that she was a survivor, and then I'm going, oh my God, me too. And it was in that moment that we decided, okay, this is where we put an end to this in our life. This concept of, oh my God, me too, must stop happening as much as we can do something about it. We didn't want to be the counselors who sit there, or the advocates who sit there telling male and female victims of all ages and stages that this is okay, it wasn't your fault, there's nothing to be ashamed of. But inside of our heads, we're like, I'm not telling anybody what happened to me. So when I came down on summer, we'd be working on, one day we're going to do this thing, we're going to do something one day. One day Sue said, we were at rituals, and she said, Vel, I'm putting my story out.
How did you feel when she said that?
I saw her conviction. I knew she was right. I wanted it for her. I knew I would support her in whatever way I could. And then I thought, oh my God, if I'm going to do this with her, I'm going to have to do it too. Not because she was pressuring me, but because I wanted to, the fire that was in her eye when she said it, I wanted that. I wanted that bravery, and I wanted it so much that it wasn't even bravery, I wanted it to be comfort. So I said, I will support you. I'm going to do it too. She said, well, I'm going on without you. I'm going to do it right away. I was like, okay. All right. It took me 3 years.
After?
3 years.
After she came out?
Yeah. I went back up to New York, and I sat at my computer and I started writing. And I got 2 paragraphs. And I was like, oh God. Okay. I'm going to put this out. This is St. Lucia. It's a small place. Everybody knows my family. And my, whatever. Enough people know my family. Oh my God. And so the internal conflict was like, it doesn't matter. This is your truth. It's fine. You can do this. And then came, but what about my family? It's their life too. Not to the point of guilt, but definitely consideration. But also, all I could remember was, I want to be that girl. I want to be that person. I want that for me. I want to be able to rock my truth. The good, the bad, and the ugly, as society would call it. And there's no such thing. I want to rock my truth. That's what I want. And I wanted to be able to give that to myself. So, on a personal level, I needed that. And so we started.
When you came out, when you first reported that to your family, I'm going to ask you the same question that I asked. So, were you believed?
Mm-hmm.
Immediately?
Mm-hmm.
Was anything done?
I was removed. Well, I was, my mom wasn't around when it happened the first time. Because our situations are different. Mm-hmm. So I had 3 different situations. At least that's what has been published, because I have had situations after what's been published. But as far as what's been published, my mom wasn't around when it happened, and then she moved me out of the situation, not knowing that it had happened.
Oh.
Yeah, and so, but I told her anyway. And then she asked me how I still wanted to address it, and I was just happy to not be there.
So you were involved in the process of what your future was going to be.
Yes, my mom. I mean, she would have done what she could have done. She definitely asked me what I wanted her to do, which is really important, because we have 2 different responses and a lot of the same effects, which is the point that we're trying to make. A survivor's journey is a survivor's journey. And everybody responds differently in some ways, but there are a lot of patterns, and we try to bring light to as much as we can. But ultimately, the underlying message is, you have the right to do this. This is not defining you. It will affect you for a long time, and you're not stupid, you're not weak, you're not all of those things. And you can live your full truth. You can live your life. You can.
We're due for a break. When we come back, I want to talk about how life has been different for you from then to now. When we come back, we're with our guests.